The gavel came down at 9:47 in the morning, and Odessa Winterbourne signed her name to a joke that would follow her for the rest of her life. She didn't know that yet. All she knew was that Roscoe Dunleavy had worked the night shift at Winterbourne Tower for 11 years, mopping marble floors that cost more per square foot than his apartment cost per month, and she decided it would be funny, genuinely, side-splittingly funny, to gift him a car for the company's Employee Appreciation Gala. Just any car. A 1987 Buick Regal with a caved-in door, a cracked windshield, spiderweb-like frost, and an engine that hadn't turned over since Reagan's second term. She'd found it, rotting behind her family's old lake house in the Adirondacks. Her assistant, a nervous young man named Barnaby Fitch, had wrapped a red bow around the antenna and driven it onto a flatbed truck, and nobody in that gilded ballroom thought to ask why. Roscoe was 63 years old. He had hands like cracked leather and a limp in his left knee, from a warehouse accident to decades back, before Winterbourne Tower, before the mop, and the cart and the fluorescent hum of empty hallways. At 2 a.m., he raised 4 kids alone, after his wife Delphine died of a stroke in the kitchen of their row house in Baltimore, and not one of those kids ever went hungry, though there were nights he did. He didn't attend galas. He wasn't invited to attend galas. But that year, someone in HR thought it would be a nice touch to recognize an outstanding member of the facilities team. And so Roscoe stood in a borrowed suit jacket at the back of a ballroom full of people who had never once looked him in the eye, and he watched Odessa Winterbourne, 29 years old, heir to $400 million, laughing before she even opened her mouth, gesture toward the enormous window overlooking the parking garage. For Roscoe, she said into the microphone, and the room tittered, because they could all see it now, the wreck sitting under a spotlight. Some intern had rigged up special for the occasion. Because everyone deserves a ride home. The laughter that followed wasn't cruel exactly. It was worse than cruel. It was thoughtless. The kind of laughter that comes from people who've never once had to think about what it means to walk 4 miles home in December because the bus stopped running at 11. Roscoe didn't laugh. He also didn't cry, didn't storm out, didn't do any of the things you might expect from a man who'd just been publicly humiliated by a girl young enough to be his daughter. He walked to the front of the room, past 300 people holding champagne, flutes, and he looked at that dead Buick sitting under its cruel spotlight. And something in his face changed that nobody in that room was paying close enough attention to notice. Except one person, a woman near the bar, older, silver-haired, wearing a navy dress that cost less than everyone else's shoes. Her name was Marlo Kestrel, and she'd been Odessa's grandfather's personal attorney for 31 years before he passed. And she was the only person in that building who still remembered what Winterbourne Tower had looked like before the marble, before the gold leaf elevator doors, back when it was 3 rented rooms above a hardware store on Fulton Street. She watched Roscoe run his hand along the Buick's crumpled hood like he was greeting an old friend, and she set down her glass. 3 days later, Roscoe didn't call in sick, didn't file a complaint, didn't do anything that would have made this a simple story about corporate cruelty and consequence. Instead, he asked his supervisor for a favor. Could the flatbed leave the Buick in the far corner of the employee lot instead of hauling it to the junkyard? His supervisor, a tired man named Gideon Pruitt, who'd worked with Roscoe for 6 years and considered him the only sane person left in that building, said sure, why not? It's your embarrassment to deal with. What Gideon didn't know, what nobody knew, was that Roscoe Dunleavy hadn't always pushed a mop for a living. Before Baltimore, before Delphine, before for kids and 2 decades of night shifts, Roscoe Dunleavy had spent 9 years as a master mechanic in Flint, Michigan, at a shop that restored classic muscle cars for collectors who flew in from 3 states over just to shake his hand. He'd walked away from it after his younger brother, Thaddeus, died in a shop accident that Roscoe still dreamed about some nights. A lift that failed, a car that came down wrong, a sound he'd never fully described to anyone, not even Delphine. He sold his tools. he left the trade. He told himself he was done with engines forever. But standing in that parking lot at midnight, 3 days after the gala, running a flashlight over the Buick's ruined frame, Roscoe felt something stir that he hadn't felt in 22 years. He started small, an hour after his shift, here and there, nothing anyone would notice. He bought a socket set from a pawn shop with money he'd been saving for his granddaughter's birthday, then paid himself back the following week from overtime. Nobody asked him to work. He sourced parts from salvage yards on his one day off, driving 2 hours each way in his ancient pickup, haggling with junkyard owners who recognized real knowledge when they heard it in a man's voice. Odessa never noticed. Why would she? To her, the joke had already happened, already gotten its laugh, already been filed away as one more forgettable Tuesday in a life stacked with forgettable Tuesdays. She had a merger to finalize, a board meeting every morning, a mother who called twice a week to remind her that the Winterbourne name meant something, and she'd better start acting like it. She'd forgotten Roscoe Dunleavy's name by Thursday. Marla Kestrel had not forgotten. She started showing up at the office earlier than usual, ostensibly to review old contracts nobody else wanted to touch, but really, to walk past the employee lot and watch, from a distance, as a beat-up Buick, slowly, unmistakably, began to look less like a corpse and more like a car. She never said a word to Roscoe. She didn't need to. She recognized the particular, quiet focus of a man who was building something. She'd seen that look once before, decades ago, on a young immigrant named Aldous Winterbourne, who used to fix radios in the back of that hardware store to make rent, before he ever fixed a company. 6 weeks in, Roscoe replaced the engine block entirely, salvaged from a wrecked 85 he found 2 counties over, paid for out of pocket, rebuilt piece by piece in his own garage with tools that still remembered his hands. He worked through a February that dropped to 9 degrees some nights, breath fogging under a shop light he'd rigged with an extension cord run out his kitchen window. His daughter Ainsley, 24, and sharp-tongued in the way only someone who loves you fiercely can be, asked him once what exactly he thought he was proving. Not proving anything, Roscoe told her, just finishing something. But that wasn't quite true, and both of them knew it. Here's the part of the story that nobody at Winterbourne Tower would learn until much later, the part that turns everything that came before it inside out. The Buick Regal that Odessa Winterbourne had handed Roscoe as a joke wasn't just some random wreck she'd found at the lake house. It had belonged to her grandfather, Aldous. It was the very first car he'd ever owned, bought used in 1988 with money he'd saved for 6 years. The car he drove to the bank the day he secured the loan that built Winterbourne Tower's first real headquarters. Nobody in the family remembered that anymore. Nobody except Marlo, who'd ridden in that Buick's passenger seat more times than she could count, back when Aldous was just a man with an idea and a stubborn refusal to quit. Odessa's mother had ordered the car hauled off to the lake house decades ago, tired of Aldous's sentimental attachment to a rust bucket that clashed with the family's new image. It had sat there rotting for 19 years, forgotten by everyone who mattered, remembered by no one until an assistant with a clipboard needed a prop for a joke and grabbed the nearest derelict vehicle he could find. Roscoe didn't know any of this. He wasn't restoring it out of reverence for a dead man's memory. He was restoring it because it was the first thing in over 2 decades that had made his hands feel useful again. The first project that let him remember his brother, without it being only grief. Every dent he pulled, every wire he spliced, was its own quiet act of resurrection, not of the car exactly, but of some part of himself he'd buried in Flint 20 years ago. By April, the Buick ran. It idled rough at first, coughing black smoke that made Roscoe laugh out loud, alone in that parking lot at 11 at night. The first real laugh he'd had in longer than he wanted to admit. He fine-tuned it over another 2 weeks. Timing, carburetor, brakes he'd rebuilt from a kit he'd ordered with birthday money his kids pulled together once they found out what he was doing and decided, without much discussion, that they were in this with him now. He repainted it himself in the garage behind his sister's house, a deep forest green he chose, because it reminded him of Delphini's favorite dress, the one she wore the day he proposed, on a rented rowboat that nearly tipped when he got down on one knee. He replaced the cracked windshield. He resewed the bench seat's torn upholstery with his own 2 hands, a skill Delphini had taught him back when they couldn't afford a proper tailor. On the second Saturday of May, Roscoe Dunleavy drove a fully restored 1987 Buick Regal into the Winterbourne Tower parking garage, and Gideon Pruitt, arriving for his own shift, nearly dropped his coffee. Word moved through that building faster than any memo ever had. By Monday morning, the staff had found some excuse to walk past the garage, phones out, some too polite to stare directly and others not polite at all. Someone posted a photo online with the caption, "The joke car is back, and it's nicer than my actual car." And by Tuesday, it had 40,000 shares. And by Wednesday, a local news producer named Cordelia Vance was calling Winterbourne Tower's PR department, asking if they'd like to comment on the viral story about their janitor's incredible car restoration. Odessa found out about it from her own communications director, who slid a printout across her desk with the kind of expression people wear when they're about to watch someone's face change. She stared at the photo for a long moment, the deep green paint gleaming under garage lights, the chrome polished to a mirror shine, and there, standing beside it with his arms crossed and the faintest, most unreadable smile, Roscoe Dunleavy. She didn't recognize the car at first. Why would she? She'd seen it once, for maybe 40 seconds, 3 years ago at a lake house she visited twice a year at most. It took Marlowe Kestrel walking into her office unannounced, something Marlowe never did, and setting an old photograph on the desk to make the room go silent. The photograph showed a much younger Aldous Winterbourne standing beside a gleaming Buick Regal, forest green, brand new, grinning like a man who just won something enormous. Behind him, barely visible, hung a sign for a bank that had closed decades ago. "He drove that car the day he got the loan," Marlowe said quietly. "The one that started everything. Your mother had it hauled to the lake house after he passed. I never told anyone, because nobody ever asked." Odessa sat very still for a long time. She thought about the laughter in that ballroom, her own laughter, loudest of all, because that was what was expected of her, what her mother had trained into her since childhood. Smile bigger, laugh louder. Let them see you enjoying being exactly who you are. She thought about Roscoe's face in that spotlight, the flicker she hadn't understood then, and understood with sickening clarity now. She did not send flowers. She did not issue a statement. She took the elevator down to the garage herself, alone. No assistant trailing behind her with the phone out, and she found Roscoe exactly where he always was on a Tuesday afternoon, refilling supply carts outside the loading dock. "I didn't know," she said, and her voice came out smaller than she expected, stripped of the practiced polish that usually lived there. "About the car, about my grandfather. I didn't know any of it when she stopped, started again. I'm not going to pretend there's an excuse for what I did. There isn't one." Roscoe looked at her for a long moment, the kind of look that measures a person all the way down. "I didn't fix it for you," he said, "and I didn't fix it for, not really, though I understand now why it mattered more than I knew. I fixed it because I used to be somebody who fixed things before I forgot that about myself. You just happened to be the one who handed me the reason to remember." Odessa asked him quietly, without any of the performance that usually accompanied every request she'd ever made in her life, if he would consider selling it back to her. "Name any price." He said no, not out of spite. He explained it plainly. "Some things aren't for sale because the moment you sell them, you sell the story too. And this particular story belonged to him now, every bolt of it. But he offered something instead. He offered to teach. Winterbourne Tower had a foundation, one that mostly wrote checks to causes nobody at the company thought much about after the tax write-off cleared. Roscoe proposed something different, a real trade program, hands in actual engines, for kids aging out of foster care in Baltimore, the kind of kids nobody bet on. The kind of kids who reminded him more than he liked to admit of himself at 19 with nothing but stubbornness and a wrench. Odessa didn't just fund it, she showed up, not for photos. She banned photographers from the site entirely over her own PR team's objections, but because something in her had cracked open that Tuesday in the garage, and she found she wanted to know what was on the other side of that crack. The first restoration project the new program ever completed, 8 months later, was Arrested in 1979. Pick up that a 17-year-old named Percival Odom brought back to life with his own hands, under Roscoe's watchful eye. In the same garage bay where a green Buick still sat, parked in the spot nearest the door, never sold, never moved, exactly where Roscoe wanted it. On the day the program's first graduating class received their certificates, Roscoe stood at the back of the room again in another borrowed suit jacket, watching young people who'd been written off by nearly everyone in their lives shake hands with a woman who once thought a broken down car was the funniest thing in the world. Odessa found him afterward, and this time there was no spotlight, no microphone, no room full of people waiting for a punchline. Everyone deserves a ride home, she said, quiet. And this time, the words meant something entirely different than they had the first time she'd said them. Roscoe just nodded, and for the first time in a very long while, he let himself feel proud. Not of the engine he'd rebuilt, or the paint he'd matched to a dress he'd never forgotten, but of the plain, stubborn fact that some things, broken badly enough, can still, if you're patient, if you refuse to give up on them, be made to run again.
Real strength is not loud, it is patient. It is showing up day after day until the world finally sees what you knew all along. Thank you for watching. If this story touched your heart, hit subscribe and share it with someone who needs to hear it today. And I will see you in the next story.